I'll go to the uh, questions that have been put. The Venkatalachalamji says, is the world unreal because it is impermanent? In that context, does hunger a real physical phenomenon or creation of mind? See, hunger is real in the objective world because you have an object called as the body. It is a bodily function. As I said, it is an aspect associated with life. The body has come about through a process of birth, and food is essential for it, nourishment is essential for it, its growth. If you don't provide nourishment, there won't be any growth and there would be death. So it is only a manifestation of the external reality where the objective world out there is real to the extent of what we are experiencing through the body. But my only point is, what I tried to tell you is, the objective world is only a background. See, the fact that the body depends on food does not make what the body is. You can't say that the food alone is the component which gives you thought, which gives you happiness, which gives you the sense of existence. Because the famous saying is there. See, we don't eat to we don't live to eat. We don't live to eat, but we eat to live. So what makes the world outside unreal is because we have created a world in our own mind which is in conflict with the world of somebody else. The objective background is the same. As I mentioned, you are all, say, most of you, maybe whoever is living in Bangalore or something like that, the setting is the same. But does that constitute your world? That constitutes only a very small part of our world. The major part of the world is what we live inside. So to that extent, this is the issue. Whereas when you're talking about physical phenomenon of hunger, it is something real and something which is essential for the life form to sustain. That's all.
Yeah, the first part of it I had asked is about the world. We call it as unreal. Is it because it is impermanent?
No. As I said, look at it from this point of view. It's not the impermanence point of it. Is it not continuously changing? The transitory nature.
Correct.
The impermanence is a part of the transitory nature itself. Yes. Impermanence in the sense of what? Impermanence you have to compare it with something which is permanent, no? Do we know anything that is permanent? We don't know actually. Somebody told us that there is something called as permanent, which is the ultimate reality, which is God, which is Brahman, which is all that nonsense. See, all those are only words. I would rather associate our objective world and the wakeful consciousness with the transitory nature of things. That's all. Because impermanence, again, pre-establishes that there is something called as permanent. I'm not going into it at all. I'm only saying that this whole thing seems to be changing. And that I am able to perceive that change. Now, the mind can create a conception of saying that, is there anything which does not change? That's again a problem of the mind only. So I'll not go into that aspect of it because that will be going into a different topic by itself. But the whole point is, what is real to me is the transitory nature of things, which I am able to experience continuously in the sense which when as long as I'm in the wakeful state, I am able to see this transitory nature of things. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, Vijay Lataji, sir, a question I have is, these conflicts that exist within our consciousness, can they be at a totality than in phases? When we see these in manifestations individually, we learn the lessons, but that is one by one. How can we know that this in totality? Now, this is a very, very, very fundamental question which has been raised throughout the millions of years of human evolution. See, the point is, we should be able to acutely become aware of the nature of conflict. The nature of conflict, why I'm saying this is, I am presupposing that my world is the only world or the best world, or everybody else and everything else should be as I imagine or as I think. Isn't it? That is the factor which I am determining. The source of conflict is, I determine what is right for everybody else. I determine how others should think. I determine how others should behave. Now, I am questioning that very basis and saying, why should somebody else be like me? I'm putting a much more fundamental question as to the nature of the conflict itself. The conflict is arising because I have separated myself from the environment completely and created a world of my own in my own consciousness. When I have divided that, conflict is inevitable. Conflict is inevitable. It is something which you cannot avoid. So when you question that basis of conflict and ask oneself as to, why do I expect the world to be like what I want to be? Because the very fact that I want something to be like this is also transitory. Today I like something, tomorrow I like something. So how do I match this at all? There is this problem of matching. I don't match with myself most of the times. I have a conflict inside and I have a conflict outside on account of that. This conflict is because of the creation of the world, which comes out of limitation. As I mentioned, when the consciousness is embodied in a person, it becomes the mind, it becomes the chitta. The chitta itself is partial because it cannot understand things in totality. And the chitta is limited by nature because any amount of experiences, any amount of knowledge, any amount of memory will always be very, very limited. It cannot think itself as in a universal manner, in a total or complete manner, because the very nature of it is the limitation. And when it is limited, it is always fragmented. It is always divided into pieces, and it's only able to see bits and pieces. When I am able to see only bits and pieces, I miss the whole picture of it. I can't see anything in totality. So unless the mind is transcended, you cannot come to it. But this process of transcending may take its own, dimensions and its own direction and all that. But it cannot be done in bits and pieces. It cannot be done in phases. It cannot be done in one by one, as you have asked. It can't be done one by one. You have to see each one in itself, in totality, and it can happen only when the mind becomes silent. Only at that point of time. That's a subject by itself. We can go into it separately, but it doesn't happen the way you have put it. It doesn't happen phase by phase and in one by one kind of thing. Because again, that is only a fragmentary approach to things. That's only a limited approach to things. Hope I have made myself clear.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, somebody else? would like to ask?
Any other questions?
I don't know. I was wondering whether I have made things complicated for all of you. I don't know whether it is simplified or complicated, because I wanted to stress upon certain fundamental issues, which I would like to just recapitulate and say, please understand the difference between perception and conception. I have given you the meanings of those two words also, which you can find in some good dictionaries also. And I've told you that conception is a mental process, whereas perception is an instantaneous, intuitive process, which is also identified with wisdom. I've also told you difference between energy and the equivalence with consciousness. That is, energy or consciousness at our present mental level of development can only visualize in different forms, but not in its pure form. Whether energy or consciousness cannot be visualized in its pure form, it can only be visualized in manifestation in different forms. And the nature of energy from the scientific point of view and the spiritual point of view also is that it is all pervasive, and it is something which is not fragmented, is not divided, is total, is something complete. And I would like to make one more important point is that in all the civilizations across the world, except the ancient Indian civilization, all the other civilizations and cultures only recognize 4 elements. That is earth, water, fire, and air. Earth, water, fire, and air. If you examine the ancient literature of several cultures, you will find that they accept only these 4. Whereas it's the ancient Indian civilization and culture is the only culture which has identified Akasha. And it is something which is inscrutable, ununderstandable at our present level, and they have given up also. The science has given up to understand space. Space is not the right term. The term which is used is Akasha, because Akasha is a tattva which is all pervasive, which is undivided. Everything is within it, but nothing touches it. Everything is within Akasha. Don't imagine it as sky or space. It is something much beyond it, in which the whole thing exists, but nothing touches it. It is the only unfragmented thing in this world, in this manifestation. In manifestation, the only tattva which cannot really be understood. Science has already given it up because they don't consider this factor at all, because they can't do anything with it. I don't want to go into some of the other scientific aspects of gravitation also. Gravitation also, they couldn't understand it. And as I said very clearly in the beginning, please don't equate familiarity with clarity. Just because we are familiar with certain words like energy or space or time or gravitation does not mean we have clarity on this. There is no absolute clarity on any of these things. We used to have a mathematics professor who used to very jokingly say that if you don't understand something, you start the subject by saying that as we all know. You would say, as we all know space and time. You simply make that statement so that everybody accepts it. So that is what Newton also did. If you go into what Newton has said, I will not define space and time because everybody knows it. Now, who knows what? I may understand space in a different manner, you may understand in a different manner. And that's how relativity came into existence. The fundamental question that is answered by relativity is, in the late 19th century, all the great scientists came together to discuss a question as to what would remain if the entire universe simply vanishes. If the entire universe, as we understand the objective universe, the physical universe, if it simply vanishes, What remains was a hypothetical question that was put by the scientists. And they came to the conclusion that infinite space and infinite time would remain. That was the conclusion of the late 19th century. But in 20th century, Einstein said both space and time are relative. So if everything in the physical world simply vanishes, there is nothing that remains. You can't say infinite space and infinite time because it doesn't remain. It's not something that is there at all. So you see how the scientific thinking has changed. Einstein till his death did not accept quantum mechanics and quantum theory. He had his own problems. So this went on and on and on. I am trying to correlate these two and tell you that it is something totally new was discovered, which was given to us by the ancient sages, which we can understand at a much deeper level. So that was my purpose. And my purpose was also to relate the three aspects of Sat, Chit and Ananda with Satyam, Shivam and Sundar. That was the purpose. And I tried to get into it so that it gives a certain amount of clarity and understanding to what we call as consciousness.
Any more questions? Okay.
Okay, if there are no more questions,
then we can close, Krishna Paniji.
Yeah, we can close. Thank you so much. I think we have almost come to 1.5 hours.
I know, but thank you so much, Krishna Paniji. It's a very difficult subject to absorb, and you sort of simplified a lot of areas that we could, kind of understand much better. But it's still, there are many unanswered questions. We'll have to give it a thought.
Yeah. We can have a couple of sessions later on when it is convenient.
Yeah, sure.
We can go into each aspect of it very closely. And as I said, it is better to have some conceptual clarity also,
Right.
and at the same time get a perceptive insight into things.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we should repeat this with some other sessions that
Thank you.
take a little bit and then explain that in deeper, which is actually what you wanted to do as well. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for this
Thank you.
session. Next week, we have two great programs for you. On 12th May, we have our Chief of Faculty, Shri Asit Ghoshji, who will be taking us through Life's Calling, Wake Up. And Asit ji, he drives the relationship between spirituality and business and has been an accomplished trainer for over 2 decades. On the 15th of May, we have Acharya Raghu Ganpati, who will talk to us on spirituality decoded. Acharya Ganapati ji is a scholar, practitioner, and teacher of the Advaita, which is the non-dual Vedanta philosophy. And this knowledge is expounded in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. So we have these 2 sessions that we have to look forward to next week. We hope you'll join us on the 12th and the 15th. Thank you so much for your presence and participation today from all of us at Ritambara, and see you again next week. Thank you all.
Thank you.